government speak to the CRTC and make it reverse course.
This is not a new tax. This is an imaginary tax.
The NDP, remember on round one with Donald Trump? They wanted us to capitulate back then. Right. We didn't do it then. And under this Prime Minister, I can assure the member that we're not going to do it now.
Your government has capitulated on revenue splitting for Gordie Howe Bridge, digital service tax, and removing funding for American streamers. What has Canada gotten in return for these concessions?
We have breaking news, everybody, courtesy of our friends at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Mark Carney and the Liberal government are currently looking into increasing the amount of money that taxpayers give to news organizations across the country. At a time where trust in both government and media is in the proverbial basement, the Liberal government wants even more of our taxpayer money to give to news organizations that are focused more on holding the official opposition to account than the government itself. But the catch is they are actually asking what you, the average Canadian, think about it. So let's take a look. Ladies and gentlemen, this is on the government website, consultations extending the Canadian Journalism Labour Tax Credit to audio and audiovisual news organizations. Join in! In order to help sustain high-quality local news and keep Canadians informed, the Spring Economic Update 2026 announced that the government is proposing to extend the Canadian Journalism Tax Credit to audio and audiovisual news productions. The Canadian Journalism Labour Tax Credit was introduced in Budget 2019 as part of a package of tax measures to support Canadian journalism. What it doesn't say here, folks, is that was supposed to be temporary. Currently, the tax credit applies exclusively to the production of original written news content. It provides qualifying journalism organizations with a 35% refundable tax credit on the salary or wages paid to eligible newsroom employees. Labor expenditures are capped at $85,000 per eligible employee for a tax year, for a maximum credit of $29,750 per individual. The tax credit rate was temporarily increased from 25% to 35% from 2023 to 2026. It is scheduled to return to 25% on January 1st, 2027. Broadcasters, as well as organizations that only produce audio and or audiovisual original news content, are not able to claim the credit. Recognizing the importance of all types of fact-based journalism in our communities in ensuring accountability and a well-informed public, the government is proposing to extend the Canadian Journalism Labour Tax Credit to audio and audiovisual news production. To ensure this extension is appropriately targeted, the government is seeking the views of Canadians and stakeholders on how best to design an expansion of the Canadian Journalism Labour Tax Credit to apply to audio and audiovisual news productions. So what does all that mean? Well, what this means, folks, is back in 2019, the government introduced legislation to temporarily introduce a tax credit for news organizations. It recognized that they were having some problems in adapting to the new media environment, and this was a way to actually help them out. Now, the catch is that you had to have reporters that were focused on print only. So you have the Globe and Mail, you have Global News and CTV and National Post and Toronto Sun and all of these different papers across the country that they have written only focused reporting. But it excluded anything to do with video. So although CTV and Global and CBC have written reporters, they were eligible to qualify for that tax credit, but anything that was on video or audio, that was excluded. So, despite the fact that CBC is getting more than $1 billion in taxpayer money every year, they were eligible for this additional tax credit because they put out print media. CTV, they were eligible for the tax credit because they put out print media as well, and so on. But what this is saying is, well, no. Let's increase that and open it up. Open that tax credit up to include audio and audiovisual as well. So not only does CTV get all of this money that makes up over 70% of their entire budget from the taxpayer, with no benchmark, with no targets they have to hit. They just get it every year. Not only were they getting the tax credit for all of the print salaried employees, now the government wants to open it up to give them even more money so that they actually will be subsidizing even more different positions related to audio and audio-visual news, their broadcast. And CTV will be qualifying for that. Global will be qualifying for that, and any other recognized journalism entity. So this is insanity, folks, because CTV already gets all this money. Then they get to look at and say, well, we're paying these employees with taxpayer money. Now we want a tax credit so that we can get back even more taxpayer money for the money that we're paying them with taxpayer money to begin with. It's virtually triple dipping at this point, right? So this is where we're at. But they're asking what we think. But before we get to that, folks, there's a couple other things that we want to chat about. First is some of the recent decisions that have been made by the CRTC and the Liberal government under Mark Carney are just, well, they're too messy and they're too bizarre to ignore. Remember this back on June 3rd? Ottawa orders CRTC review of streamer spending rules citing consumer cost. Ottawa is directing the CRTC to back down on its recent decision to triple streamers' financial contributions to Canadian content and will instead provide $600 million to the sector, Culture Minister Mark Miller said Wednesday. The decision comes after the Motion Picture Association, the U.S. group representing streamers, called on Cabinet to reconsider the current approach, and the U.S. ambassador to Canada called for the policy to be rescinded. The CRTC said in May it would require large streaming services like Netflix to contribute 15% of their Canadian revenues to Canadian content. It made the decision as part of its work to implement the Online Streaming Act. Asked whether the decision is another concession to the U.S. as Canada seeks renewal of the Continental Trade Pact, Prime Minister Mark Carney said Wednesday the government was looking at how much the new policy would cost Canadians. This is related to when the CRTC was looking to increase the Canadian revenue that Netflix, Amazon Prime, and all of these other American streaming services were actually making in Canada, and they would have to contribute 5% of those revenues to Canadian news organizations. And the CRTC back then, if you recall, wanted to increase that to 15%, as the article said. Now, the Conservatives were calling for this to actually happen a couple weeks before this. The Conservatives were saying, this is dumb. You're going to be aggravating the United States, which we're currently in negotiations with, at a time when we don't need to be aggravating our closest trading partner when we're trying to get a deal done with them. So just intervene and tell them to get on with it. And I want to show you some clips as to what the Liberals were saying in response to what the Conservatives were saying at that time.
Last week, the CRTC announced that it will be tripling the online streaming tax from 5% to 15%. And this tax will now drive up the cost that consumers pay for things like Netflix or Disney+. And just this weekend, Spotify announced that already it will take effect coming in July. They will be increasing their prices. For over 800 years, it has been parliamentary tradition that only Parliament imposes a tax. Only Parliament. Regulators like the CRTC do not have the authority to do that. So will this government speak to the CRTC and make it reverse course?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member opposite. Let me be very clear. This is not a new tax. This is an imaginary tax, once again brought up in the House. Our government is relentlessly focused on the cost of living for Canadians. That's why we cut taxes for 22 million Canadians. This decision from the CRTC only ensures that existing rules are applied in a way that fosters fair competition. This is about protecting Canada's distinct culture and identity and ensuring the vitality of our cultural sector.
When I hear the Conservatives say that they're talking about culture, well, I always have to smile. I remember very well, Madam Speaker, of the culture cuts that the Conservative government under Stephen Harper did in my riding. There were artists who were out in the streets asking for help, and they didn't get anything from that government at the time.
You see, the difference is we're putting Canada first.
That's right.
That's what we are doing. The NDP, remember on round one with Donald Trump? They wanted us to capitulate back then. That's right. We didn't do it then. And under this Prime Minister, I can assure the member that we're not going to do it now because we are determined to get the best deal for Canadians.
Because after 11 years of Liberal inflation, Liberal gatekeepers, and Liberal tax hikes, Canadians are exhausted. They're tired of paying more while getting less. They're tired of being told to lower their expectations while government spending continues to rise. And they're tired of watching opportunity leave this country because this government refuses to get out of the way and allow people to thrive. Canadians are calling on this government to make a decision with the people's best interest in mind. They're calling on this government to make life more affordable for them. It starts by scrapping this tax.
You know, CRTC, arm's length from government, makes a decision. The decision isn't quite as simple as the Conservatives try to portray it. At the end of the day, we have thousands, tens of thousands of jobs throughout our nation, Madam Speaker, where it is very much directly connected with our culture and our heritage. It's a part of who we are as our Canadian identity and how it is mediums, different forms of mediums, actually can influence that. Now, I can appreciate that Conservatives don't give a darn about that aspect.
So, you have Liberals trying to tell the Conservatives that this is an imaginary tax, doesn't even exist. Then, you know, when it is an actual tax, they say, well, you're going to make people homeless. Stephen Harper, he made all these artists homeless. Okay? And then they try and say, oh, well, you know, the cabinet can't do that. CRTC is arm's length, and the Conservatives, you know, they might not give a damn about that, but you know, we actually do. And it's this, you know, you're going to destroy our culture. So that was May 28th when that debate happened. June 3rd is when this was announced. Well, who's destroying culture now? Oh, wait, because they're going to be throwing $600 million of taxpayer money that we didn't vote for. Nobody voted for, even if you voted Liberal, to be taken out of our pockets and given to news organizations. But when that opposition motion was going through, so before June 3rd, when this opposition motion actually went through, and all the Conservatives were doing is saying, direct the CRTC to stop it. That's what they wanted. Is it any wonder that this is how the vote went? This is the result of that vote, folks. So the Conservatives, 134, voted in favor of it, and 165 Liberals voted against it, including one Mark J. Carney. His whole party was telling the Conservatives how ridiculous they were and they were attacking Canadian culture. Well, what's even more interesting is what happened at a press conference yesterday.
Question, Justin?
Hi, question for the Prime Minister, Matthew Scapes, The Globe and Mail. Going off a rough translation from an earlier question, you say funding requirements for the streamers' decision wasn't connected to Washington, but it was an irritant for Washington and a change the Trump administration wanted. Your government has capitulated on revenue splitting for Gordie Howe Bridge, digital service tax, and removing funding for American streamers. What has Canada gotten in return for these concessions?
Well, let's do a couple of things. Sorry, I'm going to do a little premise surgery for your question. Let's be clear about the bridge. The bridge, first off, the bridge is open. Bridge is open in a region, a narrow economic region that has $300 billion of economic activity that goes across land connections between the United States and largely the province of Ontario. $300 billion of economic activity. $6.5 billion cost of that bridge. A agreement that's less than 5% of that amount, less than 5% of that amount, that is then reinvested in economic support for that economic activity to enhance that economic activity. So we put that in perspective. That's being pragmatic and moving forward. And we got a bridge that's open. We've got opportunities open. And in terms of where we are as a country, we still have the lowest tariff rate of any country on an average basis. We still have north of 80% of our trade, 85 as we speak today, but north of 80% of our trade is tariff-free with the United States. And we're engaged in discussions with them. Now, we're engaged with discussions, working to have a more permanent or more stable is a better way to put it. Nothing's permanent, but a more stable relationship, trading relationship with the U.S. That addresses issues in some of our largest industries. And that recognizes the new U.S. approach to trade. So we're starting from a strong position. And I'm going to go back to one other thing, and I'll head back, which I said at my prepared remarks. And we're stronger than we were when this started. We are stronger than we were when this started. We're growing jobs twice the rate of the U.S. Our FDI is twice the rate of our nearest competitor. That's the United States. It's twice the rate of the U.S. We're the best country in the world judged for infrastructure investment. We're focused on the right things: affordable housing, community, becoming an energy superpower, diversifying. Everybody wants to do more with Canada, except the United States. Everyone wants to do more with Canada. So we're engaged in all these trade negotiations, and we're delivering them, and we're on track to have free trade access to 3 billion consumers. That's what we got.
Follow-up?
Yeah. On the streaming decision, how should Canadians interpret that decision when Minister LeBlanc and Canadian officials are at an event yesterday co-sponsored?
We made that decision 2 months ago.
2 months ago, almost to the day, because yesterday was July 29th. 2 months ago, you voted against it, Prime Minister. And you're trying to say that that wasn't capitulation. You had Kevin Lamoureux, if you recall, saying, well, the Prime Minister won't capitulate. But he did. He did multiple times. He did on the CRTC. He did on the digital services tax. He did on the Gordie Howe Bridge. He did on the tariffs. And he's saying, well, what did you get for it? Well, we've been focusing on other things. And we have all these trade deals that hasn't brought any new money into Canada. That's what we got. He stands there confidently saying that. Unreal. Absolutely unreal. So, why are we talking about this? Why am I showing you this? Because there's a rumor out there that the Liberals may even be dropping the 5% that the American streamers actually have to pay now. Now, that is currently stayed because there's a court challenge from the American streamers for what's going on in Canada. Now, there was a story published by an online organization called The Wire. We haven't been able to independently verify it yet, so it could be true, but we haven't found any evidence yet that the government is actually considering that. What we do have evidence of is that there is a court challenge from the U.S. streamers. We reported on this a few months ago, and that tax, that revenue that they're supposed to share, is actually stayed, so they don't have to pay it right now. Well, let's assume that it is true. Okay? Let's assume that it is true. So what the Liberal government is going to need to do, they're going to need to figure out where that 5% is actually going to come from. It's going to be a lot of money. So where is that coming from? It needs to come from somewhere, right? Why not the Canadian taxpayer? Why not the Canadian taxpayer through this proposed expansion of the tax credit? Because that 5% revenue from the Canadian streamers, that gets shared with many different organizations, including the audiovisual organizations, the broadcasters. So why not increase that amount to actually include the broadcasters and allow them to claim tax credits on audiovisual reporters, potentially cameramen, potentially editors, who knows? But that's what they're looking at. So that could fill the gap and potentially then some when it comes to that 5%. And this is where we think that this is coming from. This is how it relates. And for Mark Carney to basically say, oh, well, you know, we took this position just because of a cost perspective for Canadians. Really? Then why are you going to look at costing Canadians more money by allocating $600 million? So that's our money. That's taxpayer money. That's now going to these organizations. And why are you now looking to give even more taxpayer money to these same organizations that evidently can't run a business in Canada by using our money, by looking at these tax credits? Well, now we come to the point of the video, ladies and gentlemen, where you can actually do something about this. You can. So, this is what the government is asking. They're asking for feedback on these questions. I'm not going to read through them all. The link is going to be in the description, so you can check that out, and it'll take you directly to this page. And when you go through down all of this, there's a contact us. So you can send an email with the answers to all of those questions. Now, the problem is this hasn't really been publicized. So submissions are available until tomorrow. This is time sensitive, folks. So you can submit these answers to these questions up until end of day tomorrow. And I encourage you to do so. So it says, email us your comments and feedback at that email address. And as you say, who is the focus of this consultation? Everyone. We want to hear from all Canadians. So ladies and gentlemen, let them hear from all Canadians. Let them hear from you what you think about them wanting to expand and extend this initiative that takes even more of your money, causing the government to print even more money, causing our debt to increase or taxes increase down the road. Has to come from somewhere. Let them know what you think about what Mark Carney and the Liberals want to do by giving your money to news organizations that there's already a trust issue with to begin with. Let them have your say. And I would also recommend that you copy your MP, whomever party it is, so that they know what your response is to this initiative that nobody voted for and the government never advertised except from this website, and the Liberals never included in their election platform. We didn't vote for this. We don't want this. And we don't need this. It's time for news organizations in this country to stand on their own 2 feet and manage their businesses like every other business owner in Canada has to do.